My darlings, I see you, all of you. 12 signs, and a month that behaves nothing like the one you have just lived through. August gave you one enormous day. A total solar eclipse, 4 planets gathered in a single sign, the whole sky organized around one dramatic afternoon in the middle of the month. I built an entire reading around that day, and I meant every word of it. September does not work that way, and I want you to hear that plainly before we go any further. Because if you walk into next month looking for a single headline event, the way August gave you one, you are going to miss the actual shape of what is coming. September is a relay. 4 handoffs, 17 days, one planet after another crossing a threshold and passing the baton to the next. Mercury first, then Venus, then the Sun itself, on the day the season formally turns. Then Mars, closing the sequence. No single one of those 4 days is going to dominate the news the way the 12th of August did. And for 5 particular signs tonight, one specific leg of that relay is going to matter more than anything else that happens to them all month. And I do not think a single one of them is going to see it coming unless somebody tells them exactly which day to watch for. The 5 signs are Sagittarius, Gemini, Aries, Virgo, and Leo. And I am going to give you, for each one, the precise date her baton arrives, because a relay is not won by running hard the whole way through. It is won by being ready at the exact moment the handoff reaches you. I am Madame Aurora, 35 years studying the stars from my office in Manhattan, and let me give you the whole relay first, because I would rather you had every leg of it written down than tried to hold 4 separate dates in your head while I take you sign by sign. On the 1st of September, at 1 minute past 3 in the morning Pacific time, Mars in Cancer squares Saturn, retrograde, in Aries. That is friction, right at the start of the month, between action and structure, and I would treat the first few days of September as a week for patience rather than force. On the 10th, at 27 minutes past 8 in the evening Pacific time, a new moon perfects at 18 degrees and 25 minutes of Virgo. On that same day, Mercury, which has been sitting in Virgo since Virgo season began, crosses into Libra. The first handoff. The messenger moves from the sign of refinement into the sign of relationship. Notice what is actually happening in that pairing, because it sets the tone for the whole sequence that follows. A new beginning, in the most precise and detail-oriented sign in the zodiac, arriving on the very same day its own ruling planet leaves that precision behind and enters the sign of negotiation and partnership instead. Whatever gets started on the 10th is not meant to stay a private, solitary project for long. It is handed almost immediately to the question of how it will work alongside somebody else. On the 15th, a slow, quiet aspect between Neptune, retrograde in Aries, and Pluto, retrograde in Aquarius, sextiles exactly. Nobody feels this one directly, my darlings, but it is worth knowing it is there, working underneath everything else this month, dissolving old structures at a pace too slow to notice on any single day. On the 17th, Chiron, retrograde, crosses back into Aries. My darlings, this is not a fresh forward movement into new territory, and I want to be precise about that. Chiron is moving backward through the sky this month, the way it periodically does, briefly recrossing a threshold it had only recently left. Nothing about your own life needs to respond to this one directly. It belongs to the slow, background category alongside the 15th, worth naming for completeness rather than for anything requiring your attention on the day itself. And I want to say a general word about Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto together, because all 4 remain retrograde throughout the whole of September, and a great many readings treat that word, retrograde, as an automatic warning. It is not, for the outer planets in particular. These 4 move so slowly across the sky that their retrograde periods are a normal, extended feature of nearly every year rather than a rare disruption, and their presence this month simply means the deeper, structural themes each of them has been developing since earlier in the year continue quietly underneath the relay, rather than resolving suddenly or introducing anything new. On the 18th, Venus leaves Libra, where she has been sitting in her own sign since the 6th of August, and enters Scorpio, the second handoff. Value moves from the sign of the gentle agreement into the sign of the depth underneath it. On the 23rd, the Sun itself crosses from Virgo into Libra, the equinox. Day and night in exact balance, for one instant, everywhere on Earth at once. the third handoff, and the largest one, because the sun's crossing is what actually turns the season. And on the 24th, one day later, Mars finally leaves Cancer, where it has been sitting uncomfortably since the 11th of August, and enters Leo. The fourth and final handoff. Action moves from the sign of quiet protection into the sign of open declaration. I want you to notice the shape of this final pairing as well, because it closes the sequence in a way that mirrors how it opened. The sun crosses first, quietly, marking the season's turn without demanding anything immediate of anyone. Mars follows one day later, considerably louder, converting whatever the sun's crossing merely suggested into something that actually requires a decision or an action. If the equinox on the 23rd is the sky clearing its throat, the 24th is the sky actually speaking, and for tonight's 5 signs in particular, it is the day the entire month has been building toward from its very first hour. 2 days after that, on the 26th, at 49 minutes past 9 in the morning Pacific time, a full moon perfects at 3 degrees and 37 minutes of Aries, closing the sequence with a culmination in the very first sign of the zodiac. The 1st, the 10th, the 18th, the 23rd, the 24th, the 26th, 6 dates, and 4 of them are a planet crossing a threshold. Write them down, my darlings, because tonight I am going to tell you exactly which one belongs to you. Let me say one more thing about why I am building this reading around a sequence rather than a single day, because I think the reasoning matters as much as the dates themselves. A month with one enormous, universally discussed event is, in a strange way, the easier kind to navigate. Everybody is watching the same date. The scale of it makes vigilance automatic. A month like September, built instead from 4 smaller, quieter crossings, is considerably more dangerous precisely because none of the 4 individually looks large enough to demand your full attention, and a person who is not told, in advance, which one is actually hers, will very often treat the whole month as ordinary and be caught off guard by the 1 week that was never going to be. That is the entire purpose of tonight's reading, my darlings. Not to give you 30 days of even, generalized good fortune, which I do not believe any month genuinely offers anyone, to give you the one window inside an ordinary-looking month where the sky is arranged specifically in your favor so that you recognize it when it arrives, rather than folding it, unnoticed, into an unremarkable Tuesday. I will say one further thing about why September specifically tends to produce this shape of month more often than most, because it is worth understanding as a pattern rather than a coincidence of this particular year. Late summer, moving into autumn, is when a considerable number of planets complete a season's worth of accumulated motion at roughly the same time, personal planets crossing thresholds that the outer, slower bodies have been quietly preparing for months. It is not only this September that tends to arrive this way. Any month in which several planets change sign within a short span of each other will behave less like a single event and more like the relay I have described tonight, and recognizing the shape of it, once you have seen it clearly here, will serve you well beyond these particular 6 dates. Now let us begin. Let us go to Sagittarius, because your September is bookended, and I want you to see both ends of it before I tell you which one is the one that actually counts. My darling Sagittarius, the new moon on the 10th falls in your 10th house. Career, public standing, the visible position you occupy in the world. A new moon, there is a genuine fresh start, and I would use the days immediately around it to begin something professional you have been circling for a while, rather than continuing to circle it. But that is not your leg of the relay, my darling. That is simply the month announcing itself to you early. Your actual moment is the 24th, when Mars crosses into Leo. Here is why. Leo is fire, exactly as your own sign is fire. And when Mars, the planet of action itself, arrives in a fire sign that stands in easy, flowing relationship to your own, the whole of that transit runs considerably more smoothly for you than it does for signs that do not share your element. And it lands, for you specifically, in your 9th house. Belief, meaning, the larger view, travel, higher learning, the philosophy underneath the particular events of a life, your own natural territory, the house your own sign has always been most at home in, receiving direct, decisive, fire-fueled action on the 24th of September. My darling, that is your baton, not the polished career reset of the 10th, welcome as it is. The moment 3 weeks later when raw drive lands squarely in the one house that has always been yours by nature. Something you believe in, something larger than the immediate week, is going to ask for decisive action on or very near that date, and your sign, uniquely equipped for exactly this combination, is going to find the asking considerably easier to answer than you expect. The tell that it has arrived will not be subtle, and I want you prepared for that, because your sign sometimes waits for permission before acting on an opportunity that has already made itself clear. It will not look like a quiet nudge. It will look like a door swinging open with some force behind it, on or close to the 24th. And the question will not be whether you are capable. It will be whether you say yes before somebody less prepared says it first. If your version of this is romantic rather than professional, the same mechanism applies. Something you believe could genuinely matter, met with the same fire-fueled directness, arriving in a conversation you have been putting off having in full. Say the larger version of what you actually think, my darling, rather than the smaller, more diplomatic one your sign sometimes substitutes when the stakes feel high. Now let me speak to Gemini, and yours is the cleanest, most direct handoff of tonight's 5, and I want to give it to you exactly as plainly as it deserves. My darling Gemini, when Mars crosses into Leo on the 24th, it lands in your 3rd house. Your own house, my darling. Not adjacent to your nature, not requiring translation. The 3rd house is communication, the immediate exchange, the message, the word, the precise territory your own ruling planet governs in every chart it touches. And on the 24th, Mars, the planet of decisive action, arrives there directly. I want you to understand what that combination actually produces, because it is rare, and it will not last the whole month. Mars gives urgency and drive. Your 3rd house gives words, ideas, quick exchange. Put together, for a period beginning on the 24th and continuing for the following few weeks, you are going to find yourself unusually persuasive, unusually quick, able to say the precise right thing at the precise right moment, with a force behind it that your sign does not always have access to. Ordinarily, your gift is fluency. For this stretch, it is going to be fluency with teeth in it. Do not spend this window on idle conversation, my darling, however tempting that will be, because idle conversation is where your sign spends most of its considerable verbal energy in an ordinary month, and this is not an ordinary month for that particular gift. Spend it on the one conversation you have been circling, the pitch you have not quite made, the message you have drafted and not sent, the direct ask you have been softening into something smaller than it needs to be. Your baton, my darling, is the 24th, and it will announce itself as a sudden, unmistakable clarity about exactly what to say, arriving considerably faster and more forcefully than your usual process of turning something over from several angles first. Do not turn it over, say it. And notice, in the days just before it, whether you are already drafting the message in your head, revising it, softening it, the way your sign does automatically with anything that matters. If you catch yourself doing that in the 3rd week of September, take it as confirmation you have correctly identified your own baton, and let the drafting stop the moment the 24th actually arrives. Now, before I go to Aries, let me pause for a moment. If what I have said so far is landing, tap that little like button below this video. It is a small gesture and it does something real, which is tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who is about to spend September pacing herself evenly across a month that does not actually reward even pacing. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment because 3 signs remain, and the last 2 receive the single largest personal moment of tonight's entire reading. Now let me speak to Aries, and yours is not a single baton tonight, my darling. It is 2, arriving 2 days apart, and I think it is the strongest sequence in the whole of this reading. The month has already been kind to you in one quiet respect. Mars, which has been sitting in your 4th house of home and family since the 11th of August, uncomfortable there, protective rather than assertive, finally leaves that placement on the 24th. If home has felt heavier or more effortful than usual since the middle of last month, that particular weight lifts on its own around the 24th, without you having to do anything to release it. And where Mars goes next is the first of your 2 batons. It enters Leo, fire meeting fire exactly as it does for Sagittarius, and lands in your 5th house. Romance, creativity, joy, the kind you generate rather than simply receive. On the 24th, your capacity for pleasure, for creative risk, for saying yes to something purely because it delights you, becomes considerably more available than it has been in weeks. And then, 2 days later, on the 26th, the full moon perfects at 3 degrees of Aries. Your own sign, my darling. Your own first house. A full moon there is not a small event for anybody, and for you this year it is the loudest personal note in the whole of September. A culmination, a moment of being fully, unmistakably seen, arriving at the very end of the sequence I have been describing to you all night. Here is how I want you to hold the two together, because their order matters. The 24th opens something in you, playfully, creatively, before you have had time to overthink it. The 26th asks you to actually stand in the light that opening created, visibly, as yourself, without shrinking from having been noticed. Your sign is comfortable with the first of those, and considerably less comfortable with the second. And I want to say that plainly, because your instinct under a full moon in your own sign is very often to deflect the attention rather than simply receive it. Do not deflect it this year, my darling. Let the 26th actually land. Whatever comes to a head around that date, a recognition, an ending, a piece of news that makes something about you unmistakably clear to the people around you, is the whole point of the sequence that began 2 days earlier, and it was built, this particular September, entirely for you. I will add one small practical note, because your sign moves fast, and will want to fill the days between the 24th and the 26th with something else entirely, the way you fill most gaps. Leave them comparatively open if you can manage it. Whatever the 24th begins needs those 2 days to actually develop into whatever the 26th is going to reveal, and your sign's habit of moving immediately to the next thing is the one instinct most likely to blur the 2 dates together into something less distinct than either deserves. Now let me speak to Virgo, and yours is the very first baton of the month, arriving before almost anybody else's, and I think it deserves to be said plainly rather than saved for later. My darling Virgo, the new moon on the 10th of September falls in your own sign, your own first house. I want you to understand how rare that actually is. A new moon in your own sign happens once a year, for exactly 1 day, and it is, in my experience, one of the single best days available to any sign for beginning something that is genuinely, personally yours, rather than a continuation of something already in motion. Not a new moon that touches your career, or your relationships, or your resources, 1 degree removed from you. A new moon on you, directly, in the house that is simply you. And it does not arrive alone this year. Mercury, your own ruling planet, crosses into Libra on that same day, moving from your own sign into your second house of money and value. Which means the 10th of September is doing 2 things for you simultaneously. It is opening a fresh chapter in who you are choosing to be, and it is immediately turning your own analytical gift toward what that choice is actually worth. My darling, this is your baton, and it arrives earliest of tonight's 5, which means you have the rest of the month to build on it rather than simply react to it the way some of the other signs tonight will have to. Use the 10th itself, and the few days around it, to begin something that is not attached to anybody else's expectations of you. Not the version of yourself that manages everyone else's needs efficiently. The version that gets to want something purely for herself, started on the 1 day this year, when the sky is arranged specifically to support that beginning. I want to be specific about what this should not be, because your sign will be tempted to use a personally significant new moon to launch a new system of self-improvement, a routine, an organizational overhaul, which is a wonderful use of an ordinary new moon, and precisely the wrong use of this particular one. This is the day for beginning a desire, not a discipline. Something you want because it pleases you, not because it corrects something you have identified as needing correcting. And now let me speak to Leo, and I have saved you for last, because your baton is the same date as Sagittarius's and Aries's, and yet it lands somewhere entirely different for you, and I think the difference is the most personal moment in tonight's whole reading. My darling Leo, Mars enters your own sign on the 24th of September. Not adjacent to you, not in a house that requires interpretation, directly into you, into your own first house, after 6 uncomfortable weeks sitting in your 12th house of rest and release, where it has made you considerably more tired than the actual events of August would explain on their own. That tiredness lifts on the 24th, and something considerably more energized replaces it. Mars in your own sign is decisive, assertive, physically present in a way your recent weeks have not been, and I want you to notice the specific quality of it, because it is not the same as your usual solar radiance. The sun makes you magnetic without effort. Mars, arriving on the 24th, makes you capable of a particular kind of direct, unglamorous action, showing up, saying the thing, taking the actual step, that your radiance alone has never been designed to produce. Your baton, my darling, is not about being seen this time, which is usually the currency your sign trades in most naturally. It is about doing. Something you have been meaning to start, postponed through the tiredness of the last 6 weeks, becomes suddenly, physically possible again on the 24th, and the danger for your sign specifically is not missing the moment. It is spending it performing the return of your own energy for an audience, rather than simply, quietly, using it. Make a short, specific list before the 24th arrives, my darling, of the actual physical steps you have been postponing, rather than the general intention to feel better. Book the appointment, send the application, begin the project on the actual page rather than in the planning of it. Mars does not reward good intentions. It rewards the first concrete action taken while the drive is genuinely present, and your sign, given a burst of it after 6 tired weeks, will find the doing considerably easier than the deciding what to do, which is precisely why the deciding should already be finished before the 24th begins. Let me tell you about Cressida, because I think her story will make the whole idea of a relay considerably more useful to you than the astrology alone can manage. Cressida was a Sagittarius client of mine, born in early December, who came to me some years ago about a month remarkably similar in shape to the one I have just described to you. A month with several notable dates in it, rather than one obvious headline. She had, at the start of that particular month, identified an early opportunity, professional, genuinely promising, and had thrown herself into it completely, the way your sign does when something finally moves after a period of waiting. Long hours, full attention, considerable energy spent in the first 2 weeks establishing herself in a new professional direction. By the 3rd week, she told me, she was exhausted in the specific way a person becomes exhausted after sprinting the first quarter of what turns out to be a longer race than she had accounted for. And it was in that exhausted state, roughly 3 weeks in, that the actual, decisive opportunity of the month arrived, not the one she had been building toward all along, but a separate one, larger, requiring precisely the kind of belief-driven, big-picture conviction your sign carries better than almost any other, and requiring it that same week, with almost no notice. She very nearly did not have anything left for it. She told me she sat through the meeting where it was offered to her running on fumes, having given the best of her energy to the earlier opportunity that, in the end, mattered considerably less than this one turned out to. She said yes anyway, because saying yes is close to instinctive for your sign even when the tank is nearly empty, and she described the weeks that followed as some of the hardest of her professional life, not because the opportunity itself was difficult, but because she had nothing left in reserve to meet it with. I asked her, once that period had passed, what she would do differently if she had the month again. She said, I would have paced the first 3 weeks like they were a warm-up rather than the whole performance. I did not know, at the start of the month, which week actually mattered most. I found out by nearly not having anything left for it. I asked her one further question, because I wanted to understand precisely where the depletion had come from, since ordinary hard work does not usually leave a Sagittarius quite as hollowed out as she had described. She thought about it and said that it was not only the hours. It was that she had treated the early opportunity as though it were the only chance she would get that month, and had therefore given it a kind of anxious, all-or-nothing intensity that a genuine warm-up never actually requires. She said, I was not just working hard. I was working as though the month only had room for one good thing in it, and September, it turned out, had 2. My darling Sagittarius, that is precisely the risk in the September I have just described to you. Your 10th house new moon on the 10th is real, and it is tempting, and your sign will want to give it everything you have, the way Cressida gave everything to the opportunity that arrived first. Save something. The professional reset on the 10th is not your whole performance. It is the warm-up for the 24th, and I would rather you arrived at your actual baton with something left in reserve than discovered, the way Cresa did, that you had spent it all on the wrong leg of the relay. Now, my darlings, let me speak to the 7 signs I have not named tonight, because every chart receives this relay somewhere, and I do not believe in a reading that gives 5 of you the whole of my attention and leaves everybody else standing outside without so much as a date to watch for. Taurus, your baton is the 10th, when the new moon in Virgo lands in your 5th house of romance and creativity. A fresh, playful beginning, arriving earlier in the month than most of tonight's 5. Cancer, Mars finally leaves your own sign on the 24th, after 6 weeks of it sitting there making you more protective and more easily tired than usual. Notice the relief rather than mourning the intensity, and watch the new moon on the 10th in your 3rd house for a message worth taking seriously. Libra, this entire relay runs through your own sign more than anybody else's tonight. Mercury arrives on the 10th, the Sun arrives on the 23rd, both landing directly in your 1st house. This is, in a real sense, more your month than it is any of tonight's 5, and I would watch the days around the 23rd particularly closely. Scorpio, Venus enters your own sign on the 18th, the second handoff of the relay, bringing a rare magnetic ease to how you are received by other people for the weeks that follow. Use it. It will not last the whole month. Capricorn, the new moon on the 10th falls in your 9th house of belief and the larger view, and Mercury's arrival in your 10th house on the same day sharpens your thinking about your own public position considerably. Watch the 10th as closely as tonight's 5 are watching their own dates. Aquarius, the full moon on the 26th lands in your 3rd house of communication, bringing a conversation or a piece of correspondence to a head that has been building for some time. Say the thing plainly when it arrives. And Pisces, Mars arrives in your 6th house of daily work and routine on the 24th, giving you an unusual and rather welcome burst of practical energy for tasks you have been putting off. Use the drive while it lasts, because your sign will not always have this much of it available for the unglamorous work in front of you. Every one of you has a baton somewhere in this relay, my darlings, whether or not your sign was one of tonight's 5. Let me speak briefly to how this relay tends to show up depending on where you meet it, because the same date can arrive through very different doors. For those of you whose baton involves Mars, the 10th, the 18th, or the 24th in a house connected to work, expect the moment to arrive through an actual conversation or an actual decision point, a meeting, an offer, a deadline moved suddenly forward, rather than through a quiet internal shift. Mars moves through events, not through moods. For those whose baton touches a relationship house, the 5th, the 7th, or the 8th for the various signs tonight, expect it to arrive through what another person says or does, rather than through anything you initiate alone. These windows are rarely solitary. Somebody else is going to be standing opposite you when yours opens. And for those whose baton is the equinox itself, the 23rd, expect something more diffuse and less easily pointed to, a shift in mood, in season, in the general quality of the weeks that follow, rather than a single identifiable event. The Sun's crossing is the largest of the 4 handoffs and also, paradoxically, the hardest to catch in the act, because it changes the whole atmosphere rather than delivering a single message inside it. Now, before I go further, do something with me. It takes 20 seconds and it works whatever your sign. Look back at the date I gave you tonight, whichever one belongs to you. Now look at your calendar for that week, as it currently stands, before September has actually begun. Is there anything already sitting on it that would leave you as depleted as Cresa was, right at the moment your baton arrives? A commitment you could move, an obligation you could lighten, even slightly, in the days just before your date. You do not need to clear the whole week. You need to arrive at one particular day with something left in reserve. Now let me address something before I give you the last part, because a reading about winning next month should be honest about the months when winning is not actually available to you in any straightforward sense. Some of you are going to read this whole hour and think, plainly, that none of it applies, because September is already spoken for. A caregiving responsibility that does not pause for a favorable transit. A financial situation that leaves no room for taking a risk, however well-timed. A grief that is still too recent to make space for anything as optimistic as a baton arriving with good news attached to it. I want to say 2 things to that, and I want to say them honestly rather than simply reassuringly. The first is that the relay I have described tonight does not require you to do anything large in order to receive some benefit from it. Even in the middle of a genuinely difficult month, knowing which few days are likely to carry the most movement, the most clarity, the most available energy, is useful information on a smaller scale. If the 24th is your date and this September is otherwise entirely consumed by something you cannot set down, perhaps the 24th is simply the day you make one phone call you have been avoiding, or have one necessary conversation, rather than the day you launch something new. The relay still runs. It simply hands you a smaller baton in a hard month, and a smaller baton, well used, is still worth more than a larger one you had no capacity to carry at all. And the second is that some months are genuinely not for winning, whatever the title of tonight's reading promised, and I would rather tell you that plainly than pretend an hour of astrology can override a season of real difficulty. If this September is one of those for you, my darling, the kindest thing I can offer is not a strategy for seizing your moment. It is permission to let this particular month simply be survived, competently and without heroics, and to trust that the sky will offer you another window before very long. It always does. And if what is consuming your capacity right now is not simply a hard season but something that feels heavier and more sustained than that, exhaustion that does not lift, a weight that has been sitting on you for considerably longer than one difficult month usually accounts for, that is worth mentioning to somebody qualified to help you carry it, sooner rather than later. An hour of astrology can tell you which week the sky favors. It cannot substitute for the kind of support a genuinely heavy season sometimes requires, and I would rather send you toward that plainly than let you leave here believing a well-timed date was ever meant to be enough on its own. Now, my darlings, let me give you something practical, because I would rather leave you with a method than only with a date circled on a calendar. There are 4 things, and any one of them takes only a few minutes to actually do. The first, write your date down somewhere you will actually see it again, not simply in this video's description where it will scroll past you in a week. A calendar entry, a note on your phone, a line in whatever you use to track your own life. Tonight you know it. In 3 weeks, without a written reminder, your sign is entirely capable of having genuinely forgotten. The second, look at the days immediately before your date, not only the date itself, and protect at least one of them. Cressida's mistake was not failing to recognize her baton when it arrived. It was arriving at it with nothing left to meet it with. A single evening kept clear, a single obligation moved, in the 2 or 3 days before your date, is worth more than any amount of general enthusiasm about the month ahead. The third, when your date actually arrives, resist the urge to immediately assess whether it delivered what I described. These things rarely announce themselves with a label attached. Give it a few days of hindsight before deciding whether the 24th or the 10th or the 26th was in fact your moment, because the significance of a baton is very often only visible once you can see what it connects to on either side of it. And the fourth, which applies regardless of which sign you are or which date belongs to you. Notice which of tonight's 4 handoffs, Mercury on the 10th, Venus on the 18th, the Sun on the 23rd, Mars on the 24th, lands nearest to something already active in your own life, and treat that proximity as information rather than coincidence. The sky does not organize itself around any one of us specifically, my darlings, but a month with 4 separate thresholds in it gives every single person watching considerably more chances to find the one that actually speaks to her current situation than a month with only one big, shared event ever could. And a 5th, smaller than the other 4, for those of you who share a household or a close daily life with somebody. Mention your date to them, plainly, in advance. Not as a request for anything specific, simply as information. I want to be a bit more available around the 24th, if that is manageable. A relay is easier to run when the people around you know roughly when to expect you to need the track cleared, and your sign, whichever one you are, is generally better at extending that consideration to others than at asking for it in return. Before I give you the last part, if this reading has found you tonight, tap that like button. It genuinely does something, which is carry this to somebody who is about to spend the 10th of September pouring everything into the wrong leg of her own relay. And if you have not yet subscribed, do it now, because I will be back before the 10th with more on this particular sequence, and again around the 24th for the second half of it. And leave me a comment, and I want the specific thing rather than the general thing. Tell me your sign and tell me your date. Not the whole prediction, simply which one of the 6 I gave you tonight is yours. I read every single comment, truly, and I want to tell you why I am asking for something so small. Because a comment section full of 40 women, each naming a single date, is a room full of people who have each, in about 9 seconds, converted a general sense that September might be significant into a specific day they are actually going to watch for. That is worth considerably more than any elaborate prediction either of us could write out in full. Now, my darlings, let me give you the thing I have been building toward the whole of this hour. A relay is not won by the runner who is fastest across the whole distance, evenly, from start to finish. It is won by whichever team gets the baton through every single handoff without dropping it. And the handoff itself, that few seconds where one runner's hand opens and another's closes around the same small object, is, in every relay ever run, the single most dangerous point in the entire race. Not the running, the passing. Most of a runner's training, my darlings, is not spent on speed at all. It is spent on the handoff itself, on being in exactly the right position, at exactly the right moment, hand open and ready, before the baton arrives, because a baton fumbled at the exchange costs a team more time than a slightly slower runner ever could. That is the whole of what I have been trying to give you tonight, dressed up in the language of an ordinary month rather than an athletics field. September is not asking you to run hard for 30 consecutive days. It is asking you to be in position for a few crucial seconds around one particular date, hand already open, ready to close around whatever arrives, having not spent the whole of your capacity on the running that came before it. I want to say something about why this particular shape of month, 4 handoffs rather than one dramatic event, so consistently catches people off guard, because I think the reason is worth knowing well past the end of this September specifically. A single enormous event, the kind August gave you, announces itself. Everybody around you is discussing it. The scale of it makes vigilance easy, almost automatic. A month built instead of several smaller, quieter thresholds does not carry that same built-in announcement. And so people tend to treat it as an ordinary month, evenly paced, nothing in particular to prepare for, right up until the one date that actually mattered has already passed them by, unrecognized, folded into an unremarkable Tuesday. You now know better than that, my darling, for this particular September at least. You know your date. You know what it is likely to ask of you. And the single most useful thing you can do with that knowledge is not to spend the rest of the month anxiously anticipating it, which your sign, whichever one you are, is entirely capable of doing to the point of exhausting itself before the date ever arrives. It is to live the ordinary weeks around it at something closer to your normal pace, exactly as Cresa wished she had, so that when the handoff actually comes, your hand is open, your energy is available, and you are standing, quite literally, in the right place, at the right time, ready to receive what the sky has been building toward all month. The baton does not care how fast you were during the parts of the race nobody was handing anything to you. It only cares whether your hand was open when it arrived. There is one more piece of relay wisdom I want to leave you with, because it is the part experienced runners understand and beginners almost never do. The handoff zone in a real relay race has a fixed length painted onto the track, and it exists precisely because the exchange cannot happen instantaneously. Both runners are moving during it, the incoming one slowing very slightly, the outgoing one already accelerating before the baton has fully changed hands, so that neither of them is standing still at the moment of transfer. Nobody wins a relay by stopping dead and waiting for the baton to arrive into a motionless hand. My darlings, that is worth holding on to for whichever date belongs to you. I am not asking you to freeze in place for 3 weeks, doing nothing, conserving every last ounce of energy until your specific date arrives. That is not how a handoff actually works, and a runner who tries it loses just as certainly as one who sprints herself into exhaustion too early. What I am asking is smaller and more precise. Keep moving, at your own ordinary pace, through the days that are not yours, and begin gathering speed, deliberately, in the few days just before your date, so that by the time it arrives you are already in motion, already reaching, rather than standing flat-footed and hoping the baton finds you ready. My darlings, before I let you go, 3 small things. 1. If any part of this reading found you tonight, if you have your date written down, if Cressida's exhausted meeting sounded uncomfortably familiar, tap that like button. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who needs to know which day in September is actually hers. 2. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because I will be back before the 10th with the first half of this sequence in more depth, and again before the 24th for the second. If you become a member of this channel, readings reach you before they are published, and you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first, and I answer there more often and more personally than I am able to anywhere else. 3. And this is the one I care about most. Your sign and your date. That is all I am asking for tonight. And if this reading gave you something and you ever want to say thank you more directly, a super thanks is never expected and always felt, and it is a genuine part of how I keep making these readings as carefully as I make them. If you know somebody who is about to pace herself evenly across a month that rewards precision instead, send this to her tonight, while there is still time for her to protect the days before her own date arrives. You may not realize how much a single share matters. It is how this work finds the person who needs it. Thank you, my darlings. This community has become something I genuinely did not expect when I began. Top 5 signs winning next month. That is the title, and I want to close by telling you exactly what winning means in a month built this way, because it is not what you thought when this reading began. It does not mean an easy 30 days, evenly good from the 1st of September to the last. Some of the days in between your baton and the ones before it are going to be perfectly ordinary, possibly even a little difficult, and I would not want you spending them disappointed that they do not feel like winning yet. It means one particular window, a handful of days clustered around a single date, in which the sky is arranged, briefly and specifically, in your favor, and winning, in a month like this one, is simply the discipline of not having spent yourself before it arrives. Sagittarius, on the 24th, when fire finally meets fire in the house that has always been yours. Gemini, on the 24th as well, though it lands somewhere entirely different for you, directly in your own gift for words. Aries, across the 24th and the 26th together, ending in your own sign, fully lit. Virgo, first of all of you, on the 10th, in the one house that is simply, entirely you. And Leo, my darling, also on the 24th, when 6 tired weeks finally lift and something considerably more direct than your usual radiance moves back into your own first house. 4 handoffs. 6 dates. 1 relay, running the whole of September. And to the 7 signs I gave the middle of this reading to, briefly but not carelessly, your own baton is in there as well, on the date I gave you, and I would not want you to think tonight belonged only to the 5 I named at the start. Every single one of you is running some leg of this particular race. Keep your hand open, my darlings, and do not spend everything you have on the parts of the month that were only ever the warm-up. I am Madame Aurora from Manhattan, and I love you, all 12 signs of the zodiac. I will see you before the 10th.